Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Okanagan Water Supply Outlook. Let's see, we're at 11 o'clock, so we're going to get going. This year we've got another great panel of experts and water professionals that will be talking about the water supply from a number of different perspectives and angles in the Okanagan. So our presentation team today consists of Doug Lundquist from Environment Canada and Climate Change Canada. We'll be talking about weather outlook and climate variables. We have Dave Campbell from the BC River Forecast Center. Sean Reimer will be joining us from FLNORD. Martin Sushi will be talking about the international Soyuz Lake levels and the IJC perspective. We've got John Pogson. We'll be talking about groundwater, Robert Warner for fire risk, and Carrie Alex will be talking about the fishery in the Okanagan. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we're doing this broadcast from the Okanagan and the unceded territory of the Okanagan peoples, and looking forward to the various perspectives and knowledge sharing today. So one of the things that this presentation enables is an opportunity for us to look at the water supply from a number of different perspectives. We'll be looking at water flow and where our snowpack currently is and what some of the forecasts are. We'll be looking at Okanagan River and Lake and sort of the reservoir valley bottom perspectives. We'll have an opportunity to hear about the groundwater levels in the Okanagan and also get a sense of where we're at for precipitation and upcoming weather. In addition to that, we're also going to have an opportunity to hear two important aspects from the landscape, one about forestry and forest fires, and then the Okanagan fishery. So this is a diagram that puts into perspective a couple of things. One, we're at week 20 or thereabouts for this season, and this is a picture of water demand in the Okanagan. And as one might imagine, human demand, one would imagine that as we get into warmer temperatures, the demand increases. This diagram really speaks to the supply and the inflow volume of water into the Okanagan Basin Water Board. I think the key point here is that there's significant variability from year to year. You can see that we've had multi-year droughts where we've we're sort of circled around 1930. But in addition to that, we also have had some significant flood events in the Okanagan. And so it really speaks to the flashiness and the variability year to year that the region has for water input. And today we're going to get, I think, a better sense of what our expected sense of the Okanagan water supply is. And this is part of that historical context. So one of the reasons why we do this webinar ultimately is because better information equals better decision-making on Okanagan waters. We're looking at this from a watershed perspective, and really bringing in a number of different layers of knowledge to be able to support our understanding of what this year's water supply may have in store for us, and how it may impact our sort of our own portfolios of activity. This was the Okanagan Basin Water Board and our partners, and we've been around since around 1970. We have a number of mandates: sharing resources, identifying problems, suggesting solutions, and improving communications is central to the work that we do. We have a mandate to look at water governance, both at the watershed level and also to be able to support senior levels of government. Water management support and collaboration and community projects are things that we continually work on and work through. Regional approach to practical water management issues. As I mentioned, there's variation annually, but there's also variation between drainages. It's not uncommon for us to have flooding in one subbasin and not another. It's also not uncommon for us to be in a relatively severe drought in one subbasin and have storage and additional water in others. So there's significant variation from drainage to drainage throughout the Okanagan. Each water source needs its own management strategy, and we're in the process of sort of supporting some of those needs to increase the amount of strategies that are being developed both for water supply and also water quality. And because we're connected, it is valuable for us to be able to have a coordinated strategy and think about the Okanagan Basin as one watershed. And then finally, this slide just to make the point that there's only one water in the Okanagan, and that water has a number of uses, some of it for us humans, but also for the fish and the landscape and the ecosystem. And so it's really this circle of sort of social ecological system that is at play. And hopefully today you'll get a sense of what some of the dimensions of that social ecological water system look like here in the Okanagan. So without further ado, we'll get into some of the content for Outlook 2021, and I'll invite Doug Lundquist to give us the Msc Weather Briefing.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Nelson. It's the time of year that perhaps is one of the most interesting times of the year for us in Environment and Climate Change Canada, because it's the change of season from the early spring into late spring and early summer dryness. Now we're heading into the wetter part of early summer, and it's really of a great importance to us that we get this rains that we typically get in the latter half of May through June and into the first week of July. It's really critical for us for many aspects to get through the summer fire weather season and for water supply. So I'm glad to be here. We'll move on to the next screen. Okay, and it's particularly important this year. Don't worry too much about this graph. It's just a reminder for me to tell you that March and April, we had lots of top 5 dry records. For the month, this is for the month of April I have up here, but in March, let's just jump back one more month. In March, Kelowna had its driest ever March, and here again in April, we were the 4th driest, and Kamloops just to the northwest. I want to point out that only 4 millimeters of rain, even though it wasn't in the top 5, only 3.5 millimeters of rain. So incredibly dry across all of the southwest interior. This is why I'm more concerned about the normal rains we get in May and June than ever, because we're coming from a really bad place, a dry place. Next. Okay, this is a look at Kelowna over the last 3 months. So I wanted to point out the top is the precipitation. The dashed line is where we should be. The solid line is where we're at. And the little blue bars are what we actually got for precipitation in the last 3 months. And you can see the black bar there. We're only at about 15, just a little, maybe a little more than 15 millimeters of rain. We should normally be much closer to 70, over 70 millimeters of rain over the last 3 months. So extremely dry. Temperature-wise, we had that cold spell back in February, but since then it's been hovering above and below the average line, maybe a little bit more above than below, but not extremely so. So definitely dry, and for the last little while as well, perhaps a little warm. Next. Okay, so this is leading to us to the problem, and I grabbed this from the National Agroclimate Information System. So in Regina, they put out a Drought Monitor Map for us, and it shows Kelowna as being in a moderate drought area. That kind of peachy, orangey color is moderate drought, and all of the Okanagan, for that fact, is at least abnormally dry, which corroborates with the stats that I've seen. And I picked the Kelowna area because it was one of the more extreme ones. So certainly we're in perhaps a drought mode already. Next. So I wanted to show you what's coming up here in the next little while. And so I put the freezing levels in because we still have to melt the snow over higher terrain, right? And that's perhaps a good thing for our water supply. And something's missing from that screen, Nelson, but it's okay, I remember it. Anyway, the freezing levels are expected to rise to about 3,000 meters over the next week or so, to top out on the weekend when we're going to expect much warmer weather. We wouldn't be surprised if we don't see some 30-degree weather here on the weekend. A little cool today with some showers around today, but the rest of the week dry and melting more as we rise that freezing level up and get the warmth. Then something big happens around about Tuesday or Wednesday next week with the freezing levels falling significantly. And if we still have all the slides, I'll show you what exactly I'm worried about coming up next. Okay, this is the accumulated, somehow the screen that, I apologize for the slides, got somehow that's usually for the full screen, and I'm missing all of the background and my words, but I remember what's on there. So this is the precipitation for the next 10 days for Big White. And what I want to show you is that little bit of rain today is not much. We're just going to have in the high terrain maybe 5-10 millimeters. But look at next week for May 18th. Something big happens there. And that, I think, is the next upper low. And that is the start of what we typically see our upper low season. It usually kicks in around the 15th. So I'm really hoping it happens. And this is, some of the computer models are forecasting at least 15, maybe 20 or 25 millimeters of rain over the higher ground. And we certainly do need it. This is new because when I looked at it yesterday, they were only barely hinting at that precipitation. And I was like, oh no, why is our upper low season not starting? And certainly it's it looks like there's something kicking in for about next week on the 18th. I believe that's Tuesday. Head to the next slide. Okay, so this here is the outlook, and again, it's missing all my text, for the next 5 months. And if you watch it cycle through, it has each month and whether we're above or below average. And I didn't use the Canadian model, I used the European model. I don't really have strong faith in the Canadian model right now. So if we, I don't know if we can jump back one slide and then come forward, it'll revisit that. Okay, if we can go back to the one with the seasonal. Late. Yeah, you're going the other direction, Nelson. There, okay. It didn't cycle again. Okay, no worries. Anyway, what was showing originally at the beginning is that June and July are forecast to be well above average for temperature for all of the province. The Canadian model is only showing bits and pieces of the southern part of the province, but I do believe the European model is more likely. So summer highly likely above average for temperature. Next screen, please, Nelson. This is my slide that normally has it's all about the importance of rain in June. And the reason June rain is important is that it is our wettest month of the year by far. It's wetter than the middle of winter. It may not seem like it just because the fact that June is, the sun is so high and it doesn't take long to dry out after we get precipitation. But the convective season that we get throughout the latter half of May, June, and into early July is critical for our water supply and also for fire weather. And it looks like, hopefully, crossing my fingers, that it is going to start up next week. So let's watch for that. It's going to be important to pay attention over the next 6 weeks to the weather forecast and actually how much rain we get to be sure that we're getting the rains we normally need to make through summer. Next slide. Okay, I guess that's it for me. So just a little recap of all the information I have there. I want to say that I am worried that it's been so dry lately, so dry, and that the outlook is just perhaps some hope for the rains starting out here. Hopefully we get just enough rain that it doesn't cause David Campbell and the River Forecast Center consternation about high water levels, but we do need to wet things up and get more water into the system. So I'm really hoping that turns out. And certainly there you go. Nelson, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Doug.
Welcome.
Now I'd like to introduce Dave Campbell from the River Forecast Center for his presentation.
Thanks, Nelson. So I'm really carrying on from Doug's discussion on the weather side of things. And we look at the snowpack factors. If we go to the next slide, I won't go into the weather too much, but just kind of some of the key takeaways in terms of what drives the snowpack is really that interplay between temperature and precipitation. And coming into this year, La Nina conditions, we typically see really high snowpacks and cold weather, cooler weather in La Ninas. And in a lot of ways, this year didn't follow that typical trend. Doug's talked about kind of the general themes in terms of that warm and dry, particularly in the latter part of the season. And that's definitely playing a role in terms of what we're seeing in the snowpack. Next slide. So just kind of a snapshot of both the May 1st in the graphic, but also the progression for the Okanagan Snow Basin Index. Started the season fairly high, 132% of normal, and then generally tracking downward from that point, related to kind of cool dry period in February, I think, and then really particularly over the last month or so, we've seen that the implications of both the warm and the dry has brought down the basin index number. Not a lot of accumulation happening over the last 6 weeks, and the warm weather really starting to drive some of that melt. So definitely seen a big jump over the last couple of months, from 120% of normal on March 1st down to 91% of normal as of the bulletin we released on Friday last week. Next slide. So obviously, it's probably something I've been commenting a lot about in the Okanagan is, and it particularly comes out in years like this, where that temperature is playing a key role, and we see a lot of variability, particularly from the sort of mid elevation valley sides up until the highland terrain around the region. We've really had the benefit over the last couple of years of seeing some. The Ministry of Environment added a number of automated snow weather stations in different parts of the basin. It's been really good to capture that mid-elevation snowmelt in various areas, and it really helps us capture that variability across things. I know we often traditionally looked at something like Mission Creek as being kind of that real-time data for the Okanagan. It's a very high elevation site, and some of the nuances related to the mid-elevation melt are kind of lost at that high elevation. So we can kind of do a bit of a scan. We've also been adding some satellite-based surveillance of the snowpack. So I've got a bit of a snapshot here from the MODIS satellite image. It's a 5-day composite for the Okanagan Valley from a few days ago. The red is showing snow-free areas, and as we get into the color, that's showing fractional snow cover. So how much of the area, each of those pixels, is covered with snow. And we can see really we're at the stage now where we're just in the pockets of the higher elevation, 1,600 meters and above, where we've got the remaining snow. And we can look at the various data from various parts of the side of things. So all of the automated stations that are in that 1,500 meter range, they're all out of snow now. In some places, Grayback, probably 3 weeks early, if not 4 weeks early from what we've seen historically, but that gauge has only been up for a handful of years. Bread to Mine, closer to 2 weeks early in terms of snow-free date. And then we can see if the high elevation sites, it's in the middle plot on the right there, is the Mission Creek gauge. And really, we've just kind of seen that transition from above normal snow to right now tracking at normal. The other high elevation site is at the White Rocks Mountain. That's in the top left corner. It's a manual data, so the data is just point rather than a time series or continuous time series. And we can see the dot in the maze actually was a little bit above normal there. So we really have this tale of two stories, where the upper elevation snowpack is still fairly high, but essentially gone in snow in mid elevations and below. Next slide. So in terms of inflow into the lake system, and just kind of the trends that we're seeing for the year to date up to this point, we've had about 134% of normal inflow. And we are seeing that's particularly with the warmer weather, and that melting of the mid elevation snow has really come early. So we've still a bit early to say whether we actually hit the peak or not for the year. And that may depend on the weather and any additional rainfall going forward. But we are seeing a real shift on the top right slide there. Green, the kind of green shaded areas, kind of normal conditions, and we can see that this year in black has really pushed that peak several weeks early, probably 2 to 3 weeks early in terms of seeing the kind of flows. So again, being fed by that mid-elevation snow, and particularly from the warmer weather that we've seen so far this freshet. Next slide. When we look at the seasonal forecasts, and I don't know how much I've presented to this group, we have updated over the last year our inflow forecast models that we use for Okanagan and Kalamalka. These are statistical models, so we take a bunch of historic predictor variables. In this case, for the Okanagan and Kalamalka, we're looking at a mix of temperature, observed temperatures, temperature forecast. So what's that kind of seasonal forecast that Doug was talking about for the next several months? We look at inflow into the lake, as well as flows on key tributaries like Mission Creek. We look at the snowpack, and we look at precipitation at various areas. So all that information goes into a statistical model that relates those parameters to observed flow. We've used the historic model as well, just so we can have some comparison. But as we've come into this May period, we've seen a real decline in the seasonal flow forecasts for May going forward. And that's really, again, I think indicating that shift earlier in the season. So we've seen a lot of the volume come off from the snow. There's not a lot of snow left for over most of the basin. It's all really just kind of those pockets of high elevation that still need to come down. So generally speaking, we're looking at in about 60 to 87% of normal is kind of what the new forecasts are showing. The old ones, it's similar range, but maybe not quite as wide of a variety. The Kalamalka is showing quite concerning late season flows. So I don't know how much to trust this at this point, but I think it really is showing that broadly speaking, we would expect this year, because of this early shift, that influence from the snow is going to end early this year, and we should see ourselves kind of dropping down earlier than normal from the snowmelt side of things. We've got the ensemble forecast down below. That's a simulation we run from the Raven model we have for the basin, and we can see from that and running historical weather that we're also anticipating being pretty close to the peak right now, and expecting to see the flows taper off in terms of inflows to the lake over the next couple of weeks. Next slide. So I won't touch too much on the seasonal outlook. Doug's covered that, but really at this point we're kind of shifting in terms of or what we've got left in snow is just that higher elevation, 1,600 meters and above, say, that needs to come down, and we expect will come down over the coming weeks here. In terms of flood risk, I think we're past the key flood period from snowmelt. I think we always caution that, and Doug's comment about this being the monsoon season, I think is really important for both inflows, but also flood risk, that we still can see the potential for significant flows from extreme rainfall patterns. So we do need to continue to watch those going forward. But in terms of the snowmelt side, I think we are starting to see that shift, and in terms of I think risks, we're starting to shift more from that flood risk side of things, the flood risk part of the season, and looking more to that longer range in terms of the implications for summer flows, and then expectation of seeing that influence from the snow waning early this year. Couple of some of the drier weather we've been having, it is setting ourselves up to potentially being more risk in terms of the low flow season. Obviously, rainfall is is critical to this. So, and as Doug talked about, it's really not something that we can necessarily forecast long range, other than knowing that we're in the season where we typically do get much more rainfall, particularly over the next 4 to 6 weeks or so. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Nelson.
Thanks so much, Dave. And now I'd like to introduce Sean Reimer, who will be taking us through the next set of slides. Sean.
Hi, everybody. And this is sort of a follow-up on what Dave just said. And first, I'll just talk about those inflow projections, which Dave showed the May to July already from both of the models, and which he just described. But this slide is actually showing sort of a little bit more of how we got here through all of the forecasts we've received from the River Forecast Center. And again, you can see how we've really trended downward over the last 4 months, which is not surprising considering it's just continued to be drier and drier. But one of the things is, when we looked at the February forecast and we were either 123 or 112% of normal inflow projection, depending on which sort of model was used, that gave us sort of the marching orders a little bit to bring the lake down. So that's where we started to go, and obviously it has a bearing in terms of the main stem lakes and the water supply. Next slide, Nelson. So right now, these are the projected outflows from Okanagan Lake and through the Okanagan Lake Dam. And we've, very, very low to moderate flows thus far. We're just a little bit above 30 cubic meters per second. As a reminder, on the last few years where we've had, some significant high water years where we've gotten up to about 78 cubic meters per second as an outflow. So, much lower, obviously. And, based on the latest inflow projection, we are going to be next week just trending down, and we're certainly going from that, worry about flood potentially to where we're trying to, keep water in the system. And so I just think, though, that although we're clearly different than last year, the rains we got in May certainly was a cautionary tale. Last April, I thought that we would only be getting within about 20 centimeters of our full pool target. And then we went, over quite substantially. And again, that was really due to the rain, although we obviously had a higher snowpack last year than this year. So next slide. So based on that sort of schedules of outflows, this is what we've seen so far with Okanagan Lake level. And in comparison to our target levels, which would be the little green dots, or green diamonds, I should say. And then the blue line shown here is the projected. Again, this is based on the new model, River Forecast Center inflow between between May and July. And basically this is saying that we would be only getting about 28 centimeters below our full pool target. Although if we have those minimal sort of summer flows, we should be able to catch up somewhere in August and September. Again, we can adjust these. It shows we're above target, late in September, and I wouldn't really want to be in that position. So we would adjust to make sure that that doesn't happen. But again, right now it doesn't look like we're going to be getting the water to bring it up to full pool. And again, after the last few years, I was trying to keep it a little bit below, just so we wouldn't run into the same scenario as last year. Next slide. And this is just sort of a different kind of viewpoint of the inflow into the lakes, sort of on a weekly and cumulative so far. This is, going from the water year starting in October 1st. And, the I guess more interesting one would be the weekly inflows. You can see that last week, we actually had a higher inflow than our average would be. That's the black column is average, and the blue column is what to the right of it is what we're seeing. Our week would end tomorrow because the green column is really just a partial week. So there's still some more to add there, but I doubt we're going to get up to our sort of normal. And this makes sense that what we're going to see probably in a month or so, if you were to look at the same graph again with everything filled in, we would see that a little bit earlier peak in terms of our inflows. And again, I think that's supportive of what David's already told us. So I don't think I have any more slides, Nelson. I think that's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean.
And I'm afraid I'm going to have to beg off. So good luck, everybody.
Thanks so much. I'd now like to introduce Martin Suchi from the IJC to take us through the Soyuz Board of Control data for this year.
Great, thanks, Nelson. I promise I will talk about 2021, not just 2020 when on the title slide here. But next slide, please. So just a little refresh. You're all familiar with the basin, obviously, but I did want to highlight the Smelcame and how that plays into the Board of Control, with the Smelcame River flowing into the Okanagan below the dam. We do have on occasions where we have a backflow effect, a hydraulic dam happening. So the peak discharge in the Smelcame can be an order of magnitude higher than that in the outflow from Soyuz Lake and the Okanagan. So it does impact the lake levels. But other points there, the International Soyuz Board of Control, I just wanted to identify, was established by the IJC going back in 1946 to ensure the implementation of the provisions of that order relative to alterations and operations of Zozel Dam. So it is primarily centered around operations of Zozel Dam. Next slide, please. So quickly reviewing 2020 data and results. Just there's always lessons learned from past years. So there's a couple things. So the order has a drought criteria in that the lake level, the applicant, the operator of Zozel Dam, can operate the lake levels at different levels if a drought is declared. And there's a couple of conditions that have to be met for that to happen. So firstly, this condition 8A that you see here on the left, so that's the volume of flow in the Smelcame River at Nighthawk. So for the period of April through July, as forecasted by the Northwest River Forecast Center, that has to be below 1 million acre feet. So for example, here for last year, the early April forecast was just in around a million, just over 1 million acre feet. And so there was some concern whether potential drought declaration was going to be needed. By May, that forecast was up a little higher, and as you can see on the right, the eventual total volume of flow in the Smelcame was 1.7 million acre feet. So none of the drought criteria were met for the Smelcame. But on top of that, one of the following two drought criteria need to be met in order for the board to declare a drought. And allow the operator to operate the lake levels at a higher level. So first is the net inflows to Okanagan Lake. So that's Sean Reimer had talked about those. So for the criteria, it's 195,000 acre feet. Apologize for the imperial units. This is what the order is written in. I will do a next time maybe convert those to cubic meters. So last year in 2020, again, those forecasted volumes were quite high. And so there was no drought declaration, the criteria weren't met. And then the second condition, one of the two that need to be met for the Okanagan, is the lake level. So it needs to forecast it, or the peak level in June and July can't have surpassed this elevation, 1,122.6 feet. And the forecasted values were higher. And in, just as Sean had indicated earlier here, the eventual peak was quite a bit higher. Next slide, please. So moving on to 2021, we are, again, the Northwest River Forecast Center for the Smelcame is well above the million acre feet threshold. So no concern about the criteria being met there. In terms of the Okanagan, again, net inflow for the Okanagan Lake in early April, it was still forecasted to be quite high. That has been revised a fair bit, just like Sean indicated. So the current forecast is 256,000 acre feet, still above the threshold. So no anticipation of a drought declaration. In terms of Okanagan Lake level, this one's a little closer. So again, original forecasts in early April were a bit higher. And as of the May 1st forecast is now just marginally above that threshold. Again, at the moment, it doesn't look like any of the two of the three drought criteria will be met, and likely no drought declaration by the board. Next slide, please. Just a review of hydrographs here. This is the Smelcame. So the darker, the lighter but thicker line is 2021. So we are following similar to the 2020 freshet conditions here. We're above the mean, the daily mean, and currently the River Forecast Center is forecasting that April to July volumetric flow just under 1.5 million acre feet. And we are expecting additional rises in the flow in the Smelcame as snowmelt continues. On the right here, I've got, that's the snow pillow station at Blackwall Peak in the Smelcame Basin. So we are basically at the mean here for the current date, and there's still significant snow melt to be had. In terms of the forecast for the coming weeks, Northwest River Forecast Center is forecasting increases in flow in the Smelcame as well. Next slide, please. This is Okanagan Lake. Again, just touch base on this quickly. Sean talked about this earlier, but the light green line is 2021, and the lake levels are still continuing to rise. The dashed red line is that drought criteria, that 1122.6. that needs to be reached in order for the criteria to be not met. Again, this was discussed by Sean, so I'll just move on to the next slide, which is Soyuz Lake itself. Light green thick line is 2021. So we are currently, as of today, 910.73 feet is the lake level. That's within these dark black lines are the normal condition order of approval. Should a drought be declared, then the operator would be allowed to operate the lake level at within the red dash lines there, but that is not expected for 2021. We are sitting at about the 20th percentile of the historic level currently, and the lake levels are still expected to rise as the Smelcame outflows continue and potentially more inflow from Soyuz Lake, from the Okanagan system. Next slide, please. In terms of, this is the Okanagan River at Oroville. So this is the outflow from Soyuz Lake. A couple things I just want to highlight here is on the 2020 line, so that's the dark blue line. So in kind of mid-May and in early June, there's these large troughs. So those are backwater effects, as I mentioned earlier, in the Smelcame, where flow was exceeded 10,000. Generally, once it starts exceeding above 10,000 CFS, there was a slowdown in the outflow of from Soyuz Lake. Also, in mid-January of 2020 and mid-February of 2021, another thing that we see on the hydrograph here is these troughs. That represents ice jams, either at the outflow of the lake or at the dam itself, that restrict the outflow and cause a discharge decrease. Next slide, please. In terms of special projects for the Board of Control, I've left on this one that's completed here. This is USGS webcam, but I just wanted to highlight, if you go to the IJC website for the Osoyoos Board of Control or the USGS website for the Soyuz Lake at Oroville Hydrometric Station, there's a webcam there that you can access and view historic images. The next one here is the high water monument. So this is partially completed. So on the Canadian side, we installed the monument at the Memorial Fountain near the Highway 3 bridge. So if you're in the area, there's a great plaque there talking about the history of the water levels, and a kind of high water monument markings in the lake itself that identify the various peak floods. The latest one, last one being in 2018. The US monument is to be installed at Veterans Memorial Park. With COVID and everything else, we've had to delay that installation once again. But moving on here, the next project that the board's involved with right now is a climate change adaptation. So it's a multi-year, multi-phase project to analyze the vulnerability of the Soyuz Lake and the orders to any projected shifts in climate change. So phase one, we just completed this March. It's a model, a hydrologic model of the Smelcame Basin. Phase two of the project is going to be the integration of the Smelcame model with the Okanagan Basin model that the OBWB put together, and to evaluate projected lake levels and the function of the rule curve during these projected climate change. So that's in contracting right now. And we hope to have that available and present the results by next year at this time. Next slide, please. And just a couple highlights here of that Smelcame hydrologic model results. So basically, there's going to be the model identifies a shift, a significant shift in the hydrologic regime in the Smelcame River by 2100. So currently, the hydrology is a snowmelt dominated system with a spring freshet and low flows in the winter and late summer. Projected hydrology is a mixed snowmelt rainfall system, similar to a coastal system with diminished freshet, higher winter flows, and lower lake summer flows. That's it for me, Nelson. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that, Aaron. Our next presenter is John Pogson with the province, who will be talking about groundwater. John.
Great. Thanks, Nelson. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Yeah, I will be providing an overview of groundwater conditions in the Okanagan, and then at the end I'll provide a link to that real-time data for future reference so you can follow along at home. Next slide. So before we start this journey, I will just orient you to these slides. So on the left, you'll have an index map showing the location. Please pardon the jammed up identifying numbers. I don't think that's going to be a major issue. The current water year groundwater level is the blue/red line that you can see in that top graph. Just imagine this is groundwater level below ground. So just imagine the ground surface being towards the top of your screen. The green line represents the calculated 10-year historical daily median value, and that blue field represents the 10-year historical min-max range. And then just to ensure that you have a clear picture of the full period of record, I've provided a hydrograph at the bottom that will give the full period of record for the particular well that we're talking about. So starting at the north end of the Okanagan at Obswell 180 in Smelcame, we're looking at groundwater levels that are generally high, approximately that of the 10-year daily maximum values, but noting that pre-development levels were actually higher if you look at the graph in the bottom. Next slide, please. Moving down towards the north end of Kelowna by the airport in Ellison, started the water year by setting some new daily maximum levels. But that is a fairly new well. Was drilled in 2014, so the period of record is short, and we are seeing those levels starting to attenuate as we get a bit more data. Moving to the next slide, please, Nelson. We'll jump down to Rutland. So that's a well located in Kelowna, just on the north side of Mission Creek. Water levels are currently above the 10-year daily maximums, but similar to the story from up at 180 there. The water levels are high relative to the 10-year, but I will note that in the 80s and the early 2000s, we did see water levels that were slightly higher, just to give that full context. Next slide, please. Obswell 412 is set high up in the upper Trout Creek drainage. We saw some delayed start to the spring recharge, but now it's approximately that of the historical daily median values. Next slide. Moving down to Twin Lakes, a little bit closer to where I am here in Penticton. Levels are tracking above those daily medians, but within that historical min-max range for this time of year. Next slide. Now, Willowbrook, unlike Twin Lakes, levels are tracking below the 10-year historical daily medians, as you can see in that top graph. Next slide. As we jump back into the Okanagan Valley proper, looking at Obswell 407, Tukalnuit, or the north end of Oliver for orientation, tracking near or below the historical 10-year daily median values, as you can see. And next slide, please, Nelson. Yes, Obswell 405, that's tracking near that historical 10-year daily minima for this time of year. Next slide. And we'll finish up close to the border at Osoyoos or above Osoyoos on Anarchist Mountain. Over the winter, we saw low levels relative to medians, but within historical ranges, noting that there was a bit of a delay to that recharge response this spring. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll summarize what we just talked about. So in the North Okanagan, generally high above the historical 10-year daily median levels. Central Okanagan, high, many of which were above their historical 10-year maximums, with some exceptions. And in the South Okanagan, generally speaking, we're talking low, below, or rather between the median and historical 10-year low elevations, or levels rather. Groundwater levels can vary from locality to locality, as you mentioned, Nelson, in your introduction. So I would encourage folks to consult the local real-time stations for current conditions. Next slide. And those conditions can be found here at the provincial groundwater level interactive map. And if you have more specific questions, I've provided the contacts for some of our regional staff here in the Okanagan. Thank you very much, Nelson. And I think it's over to Bob Warner.
Thank you so much, John. And over to you, Bob.
There we go. Sorry, my mouse is not moving for me. The anticipation. Good morning, everybody. It's just a brief outline of where we sit today with the wildfire situation and getting the crystal ball out and see where we're going to go for the summer. So so May 10th, so we have 177 wildfires, just over 2,000 hectares, about 11 hectares each, slightly larger average than normal. Most of those, as you know, grass fires are grass fires and man-caused, so person-caused. So they move quite rather quickly, but we've been able to get on them quickly. In the Okanagan, there's just 3 active fires right now, and they're all under control. So it's they're not the heavy ground fires, or just the grass ones. So if we get the rain, that's great. It's gonna give us more grass and green it up and make things wet. But once things dry out, that gives the fire more fuel to burn. So that's always the double-edged sword of getting more grass in the spring. Next slide, please. This is, if I do throw up a slide about comparison to our bigger years in the Okanagan, where we sit now. So you can see on the right, the 2021 season, we've had a big fire here in the Vernon area. So that's exaggerated the stats quite a bit. But you look back on some of the big years we had where we had virtually no activity in 2017, 2018. And then those are record historic fire years. So a little early to tell yet, but that's what we're looking at now. Next slide. Yeah. Again, so although it's just outside of Kamloops, it's in the Vernon fire zone, so that's 100 hectares fire, which really skews the stats this year. And the grass and the wind makes fires move really quickly, so it doesn't take long to get to 100 hectares. Next slide, please. I know Dave had this one up, so sorry, Doug. Just to Kelowna, Vernon, Penticton, as you see, is dry. And then throughout the coastal as well, a bit provincially. The Caribou is looking at some flood situations in the next few weeks, so that mirrors well with the precipitation they've had there. So not ideal compared to normal precipitation amounts. Next slide. The drought code is something we always watch. So it's an indicator of long-term drought. So we've had a few areas where we were looking at the Merritt and the Penticton and Salmon Arm areas are concerning right now as of May 9th, but a big rainstorm could change that. Anything over 500 is unusual this time of year. So we are watching those ones for sure. And of course, the low snowpack is driving that. Thanks. So the summary for this is field conditions are dry for this point in the season. The low snowpack values, and a bit concerning what Dave Campbell had said about grayback and Brendan being gone. So that exacerbates things. Green up and grass, limit wildfires in the short term. And as I'll keep on banging this drum, is June rains are usually the best indicator of a wildfire season. So fingers crossed we get some rain this year. Perhaps I'll just a slide I omitted. I'll just touch on a few things of what we're doing with BC wildfire as far as preparation for the season. As I mentioned, we deployed a crew to the Caribou to help out there. Reviewed our guidelines and our protocols for COVID. So there's lots of different things going on there. Our vaccination started for our crews. Spike camps, which is putting the camps separated from each other. Small person camps and sort of the big large fire camp. We try to avoid those. Minimizing contact with public. So hopefully you won't see too many firefighters in your town. You might see one or two, and they'll be running in to get things and coming back out. So certainly some things we're putting into place. We have over 1,500 BC Wildfire Service employees still onboarding the auxiliaries, which is about 70% of our staff is auxiliaries. 250 contractors will be on board quickly. And probably June 1st, we'll have 8 tanker groups starting up. So we've got a few in place now, but we're really ramping up for this season. As per usual is what we do. I will stop there. Thank you.
Bob, thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce Carrie Alex from the Okanagan Nation Alliance. Carrie.
Thank you. Haskell Halt. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk about some of the fisheries that we had come and spawn in the this past fall and what we're kind of looking forward to for fisheries coming up this year. This archival photo is of fish caught in Okanagan Lake in 1908 near Okanagan Landing. Next slide. So just to give everybody a little bit of a context, there's a lot of fish. I'm going to really focus on salmon today. We have resident kokanee and rainbow trout that stay in the Okanagan their entire life history. Some of the rainbow trout actually will migrate down into the States, the 9 Mile Creek or Omak Creek, and then come back into Canada. But they mostly stay in the Canadian tributaries and main stem lakes. But we also have anadromous salmon that travel up the Columbia River and up the Okanagan River, Okanagan, then Okanagan, to spawn and rear here. So they spend 3 to 5 years in the ocean, and they will return here. We have one spring population, a steelhead, that come up the river and spawn in the spring, and the 2 stocks of Chinook, a fall Chinook and a spring Chinook, as well as Sockeye salmon that come back in the fall. So they spawn in a lot of the tributaries and rivers in the fall. The eggs will stay in the river either over winter or over sort of late summer, spring, if you're a spring spawner. And the fry emerge and either head down to hang out in wetlands or floodplain reconnected areas, or lakes if you're a sockeye, or other tributaries before smolting, which is heading out the 1,200 kilometers down to get to the ocean before they return. So those are some of the fish I'm going to sort of talk about today. Next slide. So we did have an average run of wild sockeye spawners return in 2020. So that was in October. So about 48,000 sockeye had returned. And in Okanagan Lake, the kokanee population was over 300,000. This was a bit of a banner year for not only shore spawners, but Okanagan Lake tributary spawners. There are 2 distinct stocks. Both of them were over 200% of the 10-year average, and we hadn't seen run sizes of this since the 1970s. So it was very exciting to see these many fish, both the sockeye and the kokanee, returning this year. We've also have an endangered population of Chinook. These are natural origin Chinook that come and spawn in the Okanagan. And we also had a banner year of Chinook. So average sockeye, banner year for kokanee, and another banner year for Chinook spawners. So we saw quite a few spawners in the Oliver areas of the Okanagan River, the Quasiqua. Also in the Penticton Channel, we saw spawners, and we saw them move north as well into Okanagan Lake. Next slide. Our concern, though, when they're in our zone of responsibility north of the border, is how well they get taken care of by us in our water management practices. So we have the fish water management tools, and you've seen some of these slides because we work with Sean Reimer quite closely, as well as federal fisheries jointly on looking at the play between what fish need and what water managers need to plan for. We did identify fairly early on this year, after the kokanee spawners had gotten into the system and had spawned, was that we were potentially going to see impacts to this amazing run size because of the high snowpack that had kind of started early on and then seemed to dwindle a little bit. So there was a little bit of drawdown of the lake that has negatively impacted some of the kokanee that had spawned last fall. The impacts of that we're kind of hoping to be able to monitor and see this year, but we do notice that there was impacts to kokanee that were shore spawning. There was very little impacts to Sockeye though this year because there was no major freshet that kind of blew them out early. And the Sockeye and the Chinook seem to have emerged before the, well, there's no major scour flows anyway, so they kind of have merged and have moved on to their next respective habitats. But we have some concern over the lake spawning kokanee. Next slide. So just some of the projects that we are looking at, since we are kind of looking at a lot more for Chinook spawning and rearing areas. The Chinook do like to spawn in sections of the Okanagan River, and we are looking into restoring opportunities for spawning as well as for rearing fry, because they really like to get into the fry, are not very good swimmers, so they like to migrate into floodplain reconnected areas. I don't know if you know the valley very well, but just about all of the floodplain has been disconnected with dikes. So this is a detriment to their life history and their ability to kind of cope with their environment, get enough food, get fat enough to sort of fight off predation before they migrate down to the ocean. So we are looking currently at some opportunities for restoration. We have some projects coming up in the Okanagan Falls section this coming year that will hopefully kind of help to offset those negative impacts to Chinook spawners. Thanks, Nelson. Next slide. What they really like is these sort of off-channel habitats that I was talking about. And so recently, just freshly finished and now about to be planted by the Inalkin Center, we have the Kemcheniqua, which is a floodplain reconnection project just in Penticton Channel. And we have already been seeing salmonids use this floodplain area. It's an ephemeral floodplain, as floodplains are supposed to be, so it'll only be wet here in the spring, and then it'll dry out in the summer, and that ends up being this perfect play for endangered cottonwood ecosystems, as well as quite a few salmon species. So we're very kind of excited to monitor and see the effectiveness of that area. Next slide. I did talk about sort of the two different types of Chinook. So we're also looking in making sure there are spaces for the second type of Chinook, often they're called spring Chinook, that typically spawn in tributaries. So we are looking at places like at Trout Creek for restoration, because we did notice this past year with, I mean, a banner year with 77 fish, but most years they're less than 30. That they do seem to like a number of tributaries in the Okanagan Lake, and we found them getting into Okanagan Lake, which was new to them in 2019. So they capitalized that very quickly and moved around. So that was kind of exciting to see those fish. So if anybody does see more Chinook, which are like 30 pounders, it's like a whale in the Okanagan. If anybody does see them, we would love to kind of follow and track their movement. So please let me know, and we would love to kind of connect and keep an eye on those fish. Next slide. So just wrapping up here quickly, for 2021, fish are just now, so we've had smolts move out through the system from last year's spawners and their rearing fry from last year, and returning from the ocean from spawners from 2017. They've just made it past Bonneville. A slug of Sockeye have just made it past Bonneville Dam down near Portland. We are expecting a range from 110 to 170,000 fish return. 80% of that total number comes to the Okanagan River. The next sort of largest stock is Wenatchee. The Yakima tribes are trying to recolonize Cle Elum Lake, and the Snake River has an endangered Sockeye population of less than 100 fish return. Next slide. So adults returning for any of these anadromous species, the steelhead, Chinook, and Sockeye, will make up. It used to be just an Osoyoos Lake population, but Osoyoos Lake is very shallow and has a lot of dissolved oxygen issues. So the more we can diversify these stocks into the many lakes that we have, the better resiliency we build into the population. So there will be an Osoyoos stock, which has never changed. There's a Skaha Lake stock, which has been around for now 14 years, and new to the second year will be an Okanagan Lake sockeye stock. So yeah, these fish are returning from the offspring and the spawners of 2017. And what we could see on site in terms of all of these areas is about 40,000 spawners in this coming fall, but a lot of them also moving into Penticton Channel and possibly into parts of tributaries of Okanagan Lake. All of this, though, they're not the most density dependent species. They're very density independent. So it's not necessarily the number of fish in the year that creates the next brood. Often it has to do with things like major water temperature fluctuations, harvest rates down in the States, or significant predation issues, which is kind of a lot what the fish here tend to have to deal with. So that actually wraps up my information on salmon in the Okanagan. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much, Carrie. Really appreciate it. And with that, that wraps up the 2021 outlook for water supply in the Okanagan. Again, I would like to thank all of the water professionals that presented this morning. And I hope to see everyone next year around this time with the 2022 presentation. With that, thank you very much and have a great afternoon and a safe travel. Cheers, everybody.